We're going to be discussing the book, Usual Cruelty, The Complicity of Lawyers in the Criminal Injustice System. And here's the book here. It's available at Revolution Books. And tonight we have the author of the book, Alec Karakatsanis, who's the author of the book. And he's going to be telling us about the book. I'm going to be having some discussion with him about the book and the theme of it and the ideas that it raises. And then off of that, we're going to invite you in the audience to pose your questions and comments to get into this. And look, this is a timely discussion. I mean, not enough people are talking about this on the level that it needs to be talked about. But let's remember that about 6 months ago, after the police murder of George Floyd, there were hundreds of thousands, millions of people in the streets, and people not just calling for justice for George Floyd, although they were calling for justice for George Floyd and for other victims of police murder, but people were also talking about an end to white supremacy, an end to murder by police. And when you begin to raise that, then you have to dig into, well, why are there police out there who seem to have a license to kill, especially a license to kill Black and brown people? What is this criminal injustice system that they are frontline enforcers for? Why does it work this way? And what needs to be done to stop that functioning, which is a expressed, felt demand that millions of people were raising through the late spring into the summer and into the fall. And those desires have not disappeared. They may not be being expressed in the streets on a daily basis the way they are, but those desires are still there, they're real. And this book is kind of fuel for digging into where does this stuff come from and what needs to be done about it. And that's what we're going to be talking about tonight, discussing the book, Usual Cruelty, The Complicity of Lawyers in the Criminal Injustice System. The author of the book, Alec Karakatsanis, is here with us tonight, and he's going to be talking with us about the book. He and I are going to be engaging in conversation, and then you all are going to be brought in on that through the questions that you pose on the various platforms that this discussion is being streamed on. I guess I should tell you a little bit about Alec. Alec's a former public defender, someone who has taken aim at the US bail system, which routinely locks up poor people who have not been convicted of anything. 80 to 90% of people charged are so poor they can't even afford a lawyer. He has personally sued court systems across the country, resulting in literally tens of thousands of people being released from jail when their money bail was found to be unconstitutional. We're going to be getting into that, drawing on Alec's experience, but also Alec's research and studying and grappling with this criminal injustice system. And I think he has tagged it exactly in the title of his book, because it is an injustice system. I have seen that from my work on the ground around it. And frankly, it is also criminal. Well, let's just put it right down and let's talk about it, because that is what it really is. You know, and that's what we're going to be getting into tonight. The book, as I said before, is available at Revolution Books. If you're in the New York area, that means you could come up to Malcolm X Boulevard, 132nd Street, and pick it up, you know, on hand. Revolution Books does have limited hours. right now due to the pandemic, but it is open. You can also go online wherever you happen to be. If you're in the New York area and aren't going out right now because of the pandemic, you could get the book, go online, get the book sent to you. That's how I did it. I didn't, want to go up to Revolution Books, even though I love hanging out at Revolution Books right now with the coronavirus spiking all across the country. I thought the better way to do it would be to order it online and get it sent to me. So I was able to get it here at home and read it. And then we're going to be talking about it here tonight. So I guess I'm thinking, let me again introduce people to Alec, who Alec Karakatsanis is. He's a former public defender and someone who's taken particular aim at the US bail system, which routinely locks up poor people who have not been convicted of anything. 80 to 90% of people charged are so poor they can't even afford a lawyer. He has personally sued court systems across the country, resulting in literally tens of thousands of people being released from jail when their money bail was found to be unconstitutional. And, as we talk about this, because through some of the activity I've been involved in, like the campaign of civil disobedience to stop, stop, and frisk, I have got personal experience being in jail with people who are there for no other reason than that they were Black or brown and in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I've been there overnight with people, calling people up saying, can you come down and with some money to get me out? And because of the peculiarities of New York and the stop and frisk policy, it was even a thing of, can you come down with an ID for me to get me out of jail? And it really shows you how this criminal injustice system works. And we're going to be talking about that tonight with Alec. I should say that this online discussion is being sponsored by Revolution Books. And look, Revolution Books is a place that hopefully you already know about. That's how you heard about this, by getting the information from Revolution Books. But if you found out about this discussion on social media or through someone sending it out to their email list, Revolution Books is a place that you should find out about. You should find out about it because it is a bookstore that has books about the world and books for a new world. And right at the center of this bookstore is the work of Bob Avakian, the architect of a new communism, a new pathway for breaking humanity out of the shackles of exploitation and oppression that this capitalist imperialist system has it enmeshed in. Check this bookstore out. Get on its e-list. Like I said, if you're in the New York area and you don't have the comorbidities or underlying conditions that would make it too dangerous for you to go out in this time of a spiking pandemic, you could check out the store during its limited hours that it's open, but you can also follow it online. You can order books through it. With that, though, I want to go back to Alec. I'm going to introduce him now, and he's going to have some things to say about this book. Alec Karakatsanis, the author of Usual Cruelty, The Complicity of Lawyers in the Criminal Injustice System. So, Alec.
Thank you, Carl. It's a real pleasure to be here with you and to be in conversation about such a urgent and important topic. I'd love to just begin by talking a little bit about this first story and the first essay, and why I ultimately decided to write a book about some of the work that we've been doing and some of the ideas that I've developed about the criminal punishment bureaucracy. I met a woman named Sharnelle Mitchell one morning in the winter of 2014. And that meeting with Sharnelle Mitchell really changed the course of my life and my career. I had stopped into the Montgomery, Alabama Municipal Court. This was 60 years after the Montgomery bus boycott. And when I got there that morning, there were 67 human beings in chains. All of them were Black, and not one of them were charged with a crime. They were all confined in a cage in Montgomery because they owed unpaid debt on traffic tickets that the Montgomery police had assessed to them. And when I arrived, I saw the judge screaming at people, telling them if they didn't pay him, he's going to send them back to jail. And so I went up into the jail and I started talking to people. And the first person I met there was Sharnelle Mitchell. And she had been sitting on her couch with her 1-year-old on her lap and her 4-year-old next to her on a Sunday night, 2 weeks before I met her. And police raided her home and separated her from her 2 children because she owed debts on traffic tickets from 2010. The city had sort of, through this scheme it had created, had given a private company control over collecting her debts, and her debts had ballooned, and this private company had put a warrant out for her arrest. And Sharnelle had been told, you can sit out your debt at $50 a day. So because you owe us $2,807, you must sit in this cage for 59 days. But if you agree to be a janitor for us, to clean the feces and the blood and the mucus and the mold and the urine from the jail floors and walls where she was sleeping on top of a bunch of other women in a small room, if she agreed to do that and to clean the judge's bathroom, she could get an extra $25 a day toward her debt. So Sharnelle was desperately writing on the back of her court documents 50, 50, 75, 75, and adding it all together and trying to subtract it from her $2,807 of debt. And here is a woman who is in a modern form of debt peonage. Black woman, separated from her children because she was too poor to pay traffic tickets, being forced to clean the most grotesque filth imaginable from the cage that she was forced to sleep in. And that morning, Sharnelle became my first client as a civil rights lawyer. I had just started an organization that was going to be devoted to challenging some of the systemic injustices in the criminal punishment system. And I met 4 other people that morning, and the 5 of them became my first clients. And we sued the city of Montgomery. And a few weeks later, we were in federal court, and the federal judge was so outraged at what was going on in Montgomery that he ordered all the top city officials to stand in front of him in person to explain how they could be doing this. Instead of doing that, they released everybody from their jail. It was a very powerful moment because we have become so desensitized to human caging in this country. What I call in the book the usual cruelty of the criminal system, that many major American cities every single day are caging people for the worst of reasons or no reason at all. So much so that they can release everybody from their jail in a single day without any concern. Right after that happened, Michael Brown was murdered in Ferguson. And I dropped everything that I was doing and I flew to St. Louis, and I moved in with one of the local lawyers and organizers who was working on the issues. And I started embedding myself with the people in the community who were out in the streets every night. And we would have these incredible meetings and gatherings and home after home, and people would be talking about what happened to them and what was going on every single day in Ferguson. And when I got to Ferguson, the city averaged 3.6 arrest warrants per household. Almost all of those arrest warrants for unpaid debt. Almost all of them for Black people. And the more I looked into this, in city after city and state after state, I saw that this was a national problem in over 3,000 cities and counties. And as we were litigating those issues and establishing the principle that no human being should be kept in a cage because she can't make a payment, it became very clear that the same fundamental flaw was the very foundation of the American money bail system, which is what happens to you after you're charged with an offense, after you're arrested by the police. In 3,163 local jails around the country, you're told you're free to go immediately if you want, so long as you have enough cash. And we began a multi-year effort to litigate these issues and to raise the constitutional challenges that are so obvious to a system that cages people just because they're poor. But more importantly, we sought to work with local organizers and people who are directly impacted by these systems to tell a radically different story about the purposes and effects and functions of the criminal punishment bureaucracy, a bureaucracy that will cage you solely because you're poor, a bureaucracy that will put handcuffs and chains on your body because of the color of your skin. And that is the work that we've been engaged in for the last 6 years, trying to change the narrative around this system of mass human caging, which has metastasized to a level that is really unseen in the recorded history of the modern world. And as we've been doing that work, a few things have troubled me, and almost none of them more than the co-optation of this movement by the very same people who created the criminal punishment bureaucracy. And the reason I wrote the book is that all across the country, you see tremendous desire among ordinary people and people traumatized and brutalized by the system to change it. And yet, all of the same people who created this system, the same corporate financial interests that profit off of every stage of the system, from the phone calls that you make to your loved one who's incarcerated, to the handcuffs and the tasers and the GPS monitors, to the bail bond companies, to the unions, the police unions, the probation officer unions, the corrections officer unions, and then the prosecutors and the politicians and the real estate developers, and all of the people that rely on this system of mass human caging to preserve their own interests. They are promoting, and in many cases calling themselves, criminal justice reformers. And yet the kinds of changes they are promoting are only changes that will further increase the power and scope of this bureaucracy and actually serve to legitimate most of its grotesque functions. So I wrote the book to really help provide people a guide for how to think about what kinds of changes to the system would really be transformational, as opposed to efforts by the same establishment elite powers to recreate the same mechanisms of oppression under a different label. And I can talk a little bit more in detail about some of the examples of that if you want, Carl, but I'll just stop right there in case you had some thoughts or questions.
Okay. All right, that's a good start, I think. And there are a couple of different kinds of things that I wanted to do. I mean, one is I just wanted to pull a quote from your from the book, and I think you have been applying it in your conversation here. At one point in the book, you said, "We must employ the language of life against the language of bureaucracy. Songs instead of shackles, poems instead of police reports." And that is, I think, a very important part of what must be done. People actually need to, well, one group of people need to actually become aware of the horrors that this system is bringing now. That's the people who don't experience this every day, and who, if they had their druthers, this wouldn't be going on, but they are unaware of it and don't always go to dig for that kind of awareness. There are times when that kind of awareness gets thrust in people's faces, things like the murder of Michael Brown, things like the murder of George Floyd pushes police terror into their faces. But then a lot of what goes on in the criminal injustice system are things that, like, you don't know about unless you're the people that it's happening to. And the people that it's happening to are hit with it in a way that they feel powerless to go up against it, and that is intentional. You know, and I was thinking as I read your book, I thought about some of my work around the Stop, Stop, and Frisk campaign here in New York. And I also thought about work that I did before that in Los Angeles, in the projects in Watts, and it came through clear to me that what is being criminalized here is actually not conduct, but people. There are groups of people who are being criminalized in this society, and not by accident, and not just by the racism of the people who run the setup. And I say not just because there is a whole lot of racism in the setup. When you look at the things that are done and who it's done to, that could not happen without a lot of racism being involved. But at the same time, there is a thing of people who the system fears because there are people who the system has no future for. And that's why in the projects in Watts, I mean, the cops had this approach of trying to get paper on everybody. They did the same thing here in New York. They tried to get, but in LA, they were much more efficient with it. Everybody, every young Black or brown man in Watts usually had an encounter with the police very young. They got jacked up. They got asked what gang they were with. And even in the cases of people who were with no gang. But to get released by the cop, you had to claim a gang affiliation. And then the next time you get grabbed up, you're a gang member. There's a crime you're going to be charged with. And in LA, they had this thing where they would give people the option to get released very quickly by copping a plea. And what most people didn't, they got like, oh, I don't want to be in jail. But what they didn't get is that this quick get out of jail was laying the basis for next time and the time after that, then you're really caught up in it. And I guess, and this is also something you speak to in the book, you speak to how this punishment bureaucracy not only works to keep itself in existence, to grow itself, because you talk about how more police, more prosecutors, more prisons, more jobs in the prisons for the guards, that kind of stuff. But you also speak to how it works to keep a status quo into effect. And this was a long roundabout way to get to. Could you talk some about the status quo point that you make in the book and how that fits into the picture?
Yes, of course. I mean, I think the function of the court system traditionally has been to preserve status quo distributions of power, whether it is power controlled by people who own things, which of course throughout our history has meant white people who own things, or the power controlled by men, or the power controlled by people who have a certain view of sexual and gender norms. At every single stage of our country's history, the court system is not at the vanguard of radical social change or at the vanguard of upholding basic human liberty and dignity and freedom against oppression. It is the locus in which the people who have power in our society legalize and rationalize and justify with a very technical set of language and a whole variety of doctrines that they've concocted. They produce and reproduce the same systems of domination using methods that justify that kind of domination using words like justice, for example. So it was the court system, just to take an example, that ruled that the massive theft of land and genocide of indigenous people in this country was perfectly consistent with the law. In fact, it was the rule of law and it was just. Same thing with the concept that one human being can own another human being, or the idea that women couldn't vote, or the idea that you couldn't marry a person that you wanted to marry because of the person with the same sex as you. At every stage of our country's history, the courts have actually sided with the people who don't, the people who have power in our society. And I think it's very important to understand that courts have only ruled in favor of people when there's enough power in a social movement that forces the courts to do that in order to maintain their own legitimacy. And one of the things that's happening right now is through a variety of things, whether it's things like the death of Sandra Bland, or the death of Khalif Browder in New York, or the attention that people are paying to the cash bail system, the idea that our legal system in 3,000 local jails is deciding who's separated from their children based on how much money they have. I mean, when ordinary people hear that, they lose faith in the integrity of our legal system. Whether it's the stop and frisk program that you mentioned, Carl, the idea that it can be illegal to search someone's body, and yet it happens every single day, thousands of times, to Black and brown people in New York City. People have no faith in the legal system when when they see things like that. So what is the system doing then? Well, it has this, in order to preserve the status quo, it has to develop a number of additional stories it's going to tell for why it's doing that, how it's doing it, how it's going to fix that. And in many respects, that set of new stories is the contemporary criminal justice reform movement. So, which I think is really designed to preserve the status quo and prevent really radical transformation from occurring. So, for example, after the murder of Michael Brown, one of the big things that happened that interrupted and co-opted a lot of the local organizing there was the Department of Justice from Washington, D.C. Came into Ferguson and said to everyone just relax, we're going to be doing our own investigation here, right? And this was the department that had just been led by the first Black Attorney General and the first Black president, and it had a lot of clout in a lot of these communities. But if you look at what the Department of Justice did, they came into a city, and I have just told you a minute ago, right, that Ferguson's police averaged 3.6 arrest warrants for every household, 2.2 arrest warrants for every adult. One of the most heavily controlled and policed and racially disparate set of outcomes of any place in the entire country. And you know what the main solution from the DOJ was? It was Ferguson needs more police and more money to train those police better. Now, many of us looked at that situation and said, the problem here with Ferguson is not that there's too much policing. And anyone who thinks so has the wrong idea of what police are actually doing. As you probably know, whether it's New York or Ferguson or Houston or Los Angeles, only 4% of all police time and money is spent on things that the police themselves call violent crime. The rest of what they're doing is controlling population. The leading cause of arrest in many jurisdictions is driving on a suspended license. And there are 11 million people in this country whose license is suspended just because they owe debts. The second leading charge in many jurisdictions, trespassing by people who don't have a home. Third leading charge, drug possession, because you possessed a plant or a substance the government put on a list of plants that you can't possess, precisely because at different times in this country's history, it wanted to criminalize Chinese Americans for opium and its derivatives, Black Americans to give the police more power, so they made cocaine possession illegal. Mexican Americans, they made marijuana possession illegal when they wanted to give the police more discretion to control them. This is the system the status quo uses to preserve its own distribution of wealth and power. And what I try to do in the book is explain that the next wave of so-called reforms that we're going to be exposed to are just going to be more new iterations of that. So it's no accident that the main reform coming out of that Ferguson moment wasn't just more police, but it was, we need to give all police body cameras. What a lot of people don't know is that the idea for police body cameras actually came from the police and their unions themselves. Why? Because body cameras are outward looking. The police are watching you with those body cameras, right? They control where they look. They control when the footage is turned on and deleted. They control the rules about what happens for the preservation of that footage. And we've all seen that even when the police are caught on video doing something, it's very rare there's any consequences for them, but they use body camera footage every single day against Black and brown people in court. Moreover, when you combine the grand plan of police departments, when you combine this body camera with the facial recognition software that they're now using in conjunction with some of the very largest corporations who are storing incredible amounts of data on all of us, our license plates, our faces, where we go, our movements. You actually have now given the police, under the guise of reform, you've given them several $1 billion of free technology that they're going to use in their surveillance of Black and brown communities. So what I try to explain in the book is that unless one of the ways you can tell whether a reform is bad or a reform is actually leading to transformation is that reform giving more resources and power and money to the police bureaucracy, or is it shrinking the criminal punishment bureaucracy? That's why things like body cameras are bad. Things like reducing the power of police to arrest people for certain things is good, right? We're reducing the things like taking money away from police budgets and investing them in things that actually help communities, also good, right? And that's one of the most profound and important aspects of the contemporary defund the police movement. It's a movement that's saying we need to dramatically change the power that police have over all of our daily lives. And I think when I'm talking about, I make a variety of points about the status quo in the book. So let me know if I'm not addressing the particular one that you want. But when I talk about the status quo, I really talk about the mechanisms that the bureaucracy uses to preserve the status quo. And I try to give people a bunch of tools they can use for determining in their local area and nationally whether a given reform by a given politician or a given set of officials is actually a meaningful thing that should be supported, or is actually a Trojan horse that's designed to preserve and reify the criminal punishment bureaucracy.
Okay. I want to do a couple things. One is I want to draw another quote from your book, which kind of pulls together some of what you're talking about. In your book, you say the conventional wisdom is that there is an emerging consensus that the criminal legal system is broken. But the system is broken only to the extent that one believes its purpose is to promote the well-being of all members of our society. If the function of the modern punishment system is to preserve racial and economic hierarchy through brutality and control, then its bureaucracy is performing well. And I think that's a very important point to make, because we encounter that in our work around police brutality. I was a co-founder of the October 22nd Coalition to Stop Police Brutality, Repression, and the Criminalization of a Generation. And we were constantly going up against this question of, well, the police ought to do their job and not brutalize and murder people. And look, that is their job from the perspective of the system and why they have them out there. And that's why it's so difficult to get them punished when they do demonstrable crimes against people. Not even just the things where it's their word against somebody else, but where it is documented. You see them brutalizing someone for no reason. You see them killing someone who's doing nothing wrong, and they still get away with it. And it's the same thing with this thing of the mass incarceration. People are like, oh, the system is broken. It's imprisoning all these people for no good reason. And well, actually, it's imprisoning people for no just reason, but they actually do have a reason. If you've got a lot of people you've got no future for, and you don't want them to be in position to upset your apple cart, and they remember what happened in the 1960s and who sparked it, well, they want those people under control, and that's what's going down. Now, I wanted to go to your subtitle of the book, The Complicity of Lawyers in the Criminal Injustice System. And if anybody's watching now who missed the beginning, because I see that the audience has been building as we've been going along, we're discussing the book Usual Cruelty, The Complicity of Lawyers in the Criminal Injustice System, discussing it with the author of the book, Alec Karakatsanis. And by the way, I'm Carl Dix. I didn't mention that at the beginning. Longtime revolutionary, a follower of Bob Avakian, the architect of the new communism. I'm also a co-initiator of the group Refuse Fascism that was out here working to get the fascists out of power in the White House. And our work isn't finished because the fascism hasn't gone away, even if Trump does go away. So that's something that people, just to let you know who I am. What I wanted you to do, though, Alec, is to talk about this question of the complicity of lawyers. Because, I mean, you've told us about what you do as a lawyer, but there are a lot of lawyers, and where do they fit into this picture? And this ties into what needs to be done to deal with this very clear and obvious problem when you look at things that, like you've talked about, Sandra Bland, the woman in Texas who gets stopped for a traffic violation, taken to jail because she's a Black woman who was not going to meekly let this cop roll all over her, held in jail for no just reason. You know, because you get a traffic violation, you don't need to be locked up. You know, but she gets held in jail over the weekend and ends up dead during that weekend. Khalif Browder, a lot of people in New York know that, but I don't know if our audience is all a New York audience. Khalif Browder was a teenager who was arrested for the theft of a backpack. He pled innocent to that and ended up being held in jail on Rikers Island for 3 years and spent much of that time in solitary confinement, which is internationally deemed as torture. And internationally, it is illegal to apply solitary confinement to children. And Khalif Browder was a child. He ends up spending 3 years in prison, and then the charges are dropped against him because they actually don't have evidence of this theft. He's released, but those 3 years, the solitary confinement, the beatings that he suffered, he was just not able to process all that and readjust and get his life together. He ended up committing suicide. So people's lives are being ground up here in this system. Some actually, the lives are stolen in this system that Alec is talking about. Others have their lives greatly disrupted. Mothers and fathers are separated from their children. People are separated from their families. You tell stories in the book about people who, for very minor things, end up in jail for decades. And some of them, not even for anything criminal. And we may be, there's one story that I just can't get out of my mind. But let's go to the complicity of lawyers in this, since I posed that question. You want to talk about that?
A very important question. I guess before you do that, I should just thank you again for lifting up the book and bringing out so many of the ideas for the book. And I just wanted to note that all of the royalties from the book are going to an incredible organization called the SE Justice Group. That's ESSIE, which was started by my dear friend Gina Clayton Johnson. And it's an organization that organizes women who have incarcerated loved ones. build a powerful movement to dismantle this criminal punishment bureaucracy. And so if you buy the book at Revolution Books, your royalties will all be going to that incredible organization, the SE Sisterhood, which has been such an inspiration for us in our work, and such dear friends for us. And I mentioned SE just by way of noting that most of the work that's going on that is very exciting to me is not being done by lawyers. And I think many lawyers think of themselves as at the vanguard of social change and as the smartest person in the room and as the people that have access to some kind of special knowledge. And I think that has been a very dangerous development in left-leaning social movements, because the kinds of tools that we lawyers traditionally learn and prioritize are really the tools that the system itself uses to keep people controlled and to not only brutalize people, but to justify and rationalize that brutality in the name of some of our loftier values, even going so far as to use the word justice to describe a society in a legal system that cages Black people at a rate 6 times that of South Africa at the height of apartheid. And it's us lawyers, and I'm not excluding myself, I'm including myself in this. Us lawyers have learned a variety of ways of looking the other way, of justifying on technicalities, of using the language of a bureaucracy rather than the language of human beings, to create this massive bureaucracy. I mean, we are taking 11 million human beings away from their families every single year, from their churches and schools and jobs and housing and mental health care and medical care, and putting them into government-run cages where they are likely to be sexually and physically abused, to be, as you mentioned, placed in solitary confinement, placed in cells that are covered in mucus and feces and blood and urine and mold. In most jails, people don't have access to fresh air or sunlight. I do a lot of work in the city of Houston, for example, and the jail is this beautiful building with lots of windows overlooking the bayou, the water in downtown Houston, and the windows are fake. The windows are fake because it's more important in Houston for the people who work and live downtown to see a nice building with windows than it is for people on the inside to get sunlight. And lawyers have glided by all of this. We have ignored much of it. And in fact, many of us, and I'm not just talking about the judges and the prosecutors who are actively trying to put people into these cages. I'm also talking about public defenders and civil rights lawyers like myself who have prioritized a certain way of fighting against this system, a certain way of thinking and arguing, a way that has not prioritized the strategy and vision and creativity and stories of the people who are most harmed, but that has often centered lawyers themselves, and prioritized, if not centering them, prioritizing the types of things that lawyers think they're good at. I think the two greatest flaws, though, of the legal profession here, which I get at in the book in much more detail, are we have failed as a profession to stay sensitized to the everyday cruelty of the system. In other words, we have become desensitized to things that really should shock us to the core. So for example, when I arrived as a public defender in Washington, D.C., I went into the juvenile court, which is in the basement of the local court in D.C., right across from the National Gallery of Art and right down the street from the Capitol building. And in that basement room, every single day, all of the detained children are fully restrained in metal chains, hands, waist, feet. In 3 years working there, I never saw a white child there. I saw Black children every single day, children who were 8 years old, 9 years old, 12 years old, children who'd been abused and neglected, children who had intellectual disabilities, children who had anxiety and depression, children who couldn't understand why their limbs were bound and couldn't understand what was happening to them and couldn't even speak because they were so traumatized by it. And when I got there, I heard that nobody could remember in many, many years any lawyer making an objection to the random, indiscriminate shackling of Black children. How do we get to the point where everyone in that courtroom, from the judges to the prosecutors to the defense lawyers to the probation officers, were totally okay with the indiscriminate shackling of Black children, tiny children who were traumatized in ways that are unspeakable by that? I could go on and on. The money bail system. How do we get to a point where in many major jurisdictions around the country, there has not been a single bail appeal filed for a criminal defendant in years? How do we get to the point where someone is put in a cage away from her family because she can't pay cash bail, and her lawyer is not even filing a challenge to that, not even asking the court to review that, not even appealing it when the court rules against you? I could go on and on, example after example. I think the broader point is not to indict lawyers as bad people. I think precisely the opposite is true. The system always wants us to blame individual people. They want us to blame our clients for the crimes they commit. They want to blame the bad cop for all of the problems with police. But precisely the opposite is true. In all of these systems, ordinary people, good people, are capable of participating in extraordinary harms because of the way these structures are set up. It is structured to make us indifferent. It is structured to make us lose our humanity and to lose sight of the things that connect us to other human beings. And the bureaucracy is structured to run like an assembly line where efficiency is prized over humanity. And I want to make a point very clear. All of us are capable of participating in monstrous harm under the right circumstances and in the right atmosphere. And what we have done in our criminal system is created one of the most efficient and cruel bureaucracies in the modern history of the world. And in that context, many ordinary people who are otherwise very good people, who are very nice to their pets when they go home and to their spouses and to their children, and who live otherwise very ordinary lives, are capable of inflicting enormous pain and trauma. And that's one of the things I was trying to understand in the book and trying to move forward in a constructive way. Because we won't make any progress by indicting all of the people who are participating in this as bad people. Instead, we need to look at our sort of collective responsibility for creating a better system.
Okay. Right now, I want to tell people a little bit more about Revolution Books, because Revolution Books is sponsoring this discussion tonight. And this is the kind of discussion that we do here at Revolution Books. There was a time before the pandemic when we mostly did it physically inside the bookstore, and really a nice place. It's had limited hours right now, and people who are able to get out can go to Revolution Books. Its hours are Tuesday through Saturday from 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. And look, this is the holidays. A lot of people are looking for gifts that they want to give to people. And you should give some gifts that matter. It would matter for some young person or some older person to get a copy of Usual Cruelty, Alec's book. It could help them understand what's going on in an arena that they may not have direct experience with. There are other books. Like I said at the beginning, Revolution Books has books about the world and books for a new world, fiction, nonfiction, poetry, different things like that. It's a place that people can do their holiday shopping. And the other thing is, this is a bookstore that exists for people with big questions, and it addresses those big questions. Contact the store, connect with us online. if you're out and about these days, come by the store during these limited hours from 2 to 7 p.m. Tuesday through Saturday and talk with us. Why is the world the way it is? How did it get that way? And what would it take to truly change it? And because look, we value critical thinking, we value the poetic spirit and a search for the truth, which has to be a broad collective search for the truth. This is something that the new communism of Bob Avakian really rests on, the search for the truth, because without actually getting to reality the way it actually is, you can't transform it in a better direction. And look, we come from a thing that it's going to take revolution, nothing less, to get us out of this. We need some different conditions for humanity, because Alec talks about how in the conditions that exist, anybody could get caught up in it and carry it out. And look, historically, that's been real, because when you look at something as horrific as, say, Nazi Germany, all of the people who played roles in that or went along with it, didn't stand up against it. They didn't all start out as committed Nazis, and some of them never became committed Nazis. But because of the conditions that existed, it was easier to go along with it. Just like, and this is a real thing, because we have to remember the Nazis studied America to put their stuff together. They studied how America treated Black people to come up with their approach to the Jewish question. This is also a country where people can go along with horrific crimes. But we need a new society and a new world. And we believe it'll take revolution to bring that world into being. So support Revolution Books. Buy some books for the holiday. Also donate to Revolution Books. You can donate today. You can make a one-time donation. You can become a monthly sustainer. Up on the screen right now are ways that you can contribute to Revolution Books through Venmo, through Cash App, PayPal me. It's up there on the thing. Venmo is at Revolution Books NYC. On Cash App, it's $, or it's at Rev Books NYC. Cash App, it's $Rev Books NYC. PayPal.me/Rev Books NYC is another way to do it. Or you can just go to our website, revolutionbooksnyc.org. These are all the ways that you can support this bookstore. Really do that. And you can also spread the word about Revolution Books on your social media. Get on the Revolution Books e-list and spread the word about activities. These are all things that you can do to support this bookstore. Now, I want to go, in light of raising this question of a new world and how to get there, I want to go to that story from your book that I just can't get out of my mind, and I'm losing some of the details, but maybe you can help me with it. The guy who stole some vitamins was charged with stealing vitamins from pharmacy, I guess it was. He walks out with the vitamins and gets arrested, and it turns out he was hungry, he was homeless, he was weak, and he felt like these vitamins might help him to get through a tough patch. And he ended up being arrested, charged with theft, and having the 3 strikes California law invoked on him. So he gets a sentence of life in prison for stealing some vitamins. And the reason this stuck in my mind is because a point that Bob Avakian, the revolutionary leader that I mentioned, has raised is, why is there no right to eat in this society? Because, they talk about freedom and democracy and all like that, and the Constitution is supposed to be based on life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But there actually is no right to eat. I mean, you can eat in this society if you can afford to eat in this society. But if you don't have the funds for that, then it becomes criminal for you to eat. And in this case, the guy was taking some vitamins because he wanted to, oh, maybe this will help strengthen me in this tough patch that I'm going through. And he ends up with a sentence of life in prison. Now, as I understand, an attorney helped to get that cut down, but he still spent 10 years in jail. And that does pose to me that we need a totally different society. This point that I'm raising about the right to eat is something that Avakian gets into in a book that collects some of his writings on the law. And what's the title of the book? I am forgetting the title. That's not good. Why can't I come up with that title? Constitution, Law, and Rights in Capitalist Society and in the Future Socialist Society. That's the title of the book, and it has the writings of Bob Avakian on the law, including this point about the right to eat. And I also wanted to bring to people's attention a Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America, written by Bob Avakian. And this is a book that lays out how a revolutionary society would function, what the government would be like, what the economy would run based upon. And what, just to make it real quick and clear, no longer would it be based on exploitation. No longer would it be built on a monopoly of wealth and power in the hands of a few. It talks about the rights of the people. But I wanted to go down to this question of a right to eat. And this isn't the only right, but it's a very important right that people ought to have. And it's motivated a lot of the work that I do, because I talked about working in the projects in Watts. I talked about the campaign to Stop, Stop, and Frisk. And what's underlies our approach to that. It's been an approach that we take called Fight the Power and Transform the People for Revolution, because that's what we think it's going to take to actually transform the society and bring this new world, the kind of world that people could thrive in, into being. And what we mean by that is when there are these injustices, you have to resist them. If you don't resist these injustices, they will continue and continue and continue. But as you resist, you have to get a deeper understanding of why they happen. And this seems to tie in to the point you're making about the co-optation of the criminal justice reform movement. And you speak to that even more in your book, and people should really read that. But I guess I wanted us to talk a little bit about that. And so what do you think?
Well, it's a really profound question, and the answer to it speaks volumes about the kind of society that we live in. And you could expand the question, why is there not a right to shelter?
True.
Right? Why is there not a right to medical care? And the answers to that question is that those rights are incompatible with the kind of inequality that we have in our society that benefits people who own things. And they're incompatible with moreover, the fundamental series of fundamental attitudes about the mentalities about human nature that underlie the capitalist system. If we had rules and laws like that, it would force people to be much more connected to each other and force people to be much more wrapped up in each other's well-being. And that is really antithetical to the very individualistic view of human nature and the world that is fundamental to modern neoliberal thinking. And it would be a cancer at the core of that kind of system that would eat away at all of the other hierarchies and distributions of wealth that are built on top of those basic assumptions. And I think that's probably why the capitalist class has resisted even very basic things like enshrining a right to a place to live, and enshrining a right to food, because it would, to make that right real, it would force all kinds of new connections between people in their communities. And it would force a really different way of thinking and being, one that didn't blame individuals for the things that are bad about our world, and instead understood that individuals are really a part of a much broader sort of structural context, and making that kind of commitment to hold and take care of other people, and ensuring that other people have the basic things that they need to flourish, is just really inconsistent with the attitude that people who profit from capitalism hold. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have anything more profound to say about it at the moment in the negative 1 minute that I have, but I would say that it's a very interesting connection to the criminal system, in the sense that prosecutors have and police have almost unlimited discretion in which crimes they investigate and prosecute. So, for example, wage theft is a huge problem. Current estimates are that it's about $50 to $100 billion a year, and yet there are almost zero wage theft prosecutions every year in the U.S. Wage theft dwarfs by a factor of 10 all other shoplifting, theft, burglary, robbery combined. And yet there are tens of thousands of prosecutions for each of those things every single year, and no prosecutions for wage theft by employers. These are just prosecutorial and police discretionary decisions. So they are, it would be totally within any district attorney's power to say, I am not going to prosecute anyone who is hungry from taking food. They could announce that policy tomorrow in any city. Any DA could say that. Just like they're currently saying, I'm not going to enforce wage theft laws. Same is true with drug use. Basically, every DA in most major cities has said, we're not going to enforce drug laws on rich university campuses. We're going to enforce them in Black communities down the street. These are just decisions that police and prosecutors are making. And so anyone who wanted to at any time could say, you know what, we're not going to enforce the laws about stealing vitamins if your body is in need of nourishment. But when you start picking away at that, that would undermine the entire concept of the ownership of property. It would undermine the entire concept that some people can hoard wealth, that some people can take land from other people and steal their bodies and their labor for centuries, and then construct walls on that land. And then a couple centuries later, create a police force that prevents the person whose land you stole from coming onto your property by the threat of a gun and force and violence and tasers. By the time you really pick apart all of these things, you see why there's no law that grants a right to food and a right to shelter. Because it would undermine the whole idea that wealthy people, mostly white people, can enclose certain aspects of real or personal property and prevent the rest of us from accessing it. Now, I'm just making very broad points here. I'm not saying there should be no concept of personal space and personal property. Quite the contrary. I'm saying that many of the ways in which certain segments of our population enjoy personal space and personal property should be things that apply to everybody, and could be, given how much wealth and space and property they're hoarding. I'm just pointing out that the existing criminal punishment bureaucracy is serving the interests of that one segment of our society. I'll just leave it there. I know I've gone a little bit over time, and but I wanted to try to do justice to your really profound question.
Yeah, and I think on your thing about personal space, what this society and this capitalist system is based on is things that should be collective property and could be collective property and used to meet the needs of everybody in society have become personal property, individual property. so that someone has mansions and other people, some people have mansions and other people have nowhere to live. Some people have plantations, other people have no land on which to farm, depending on which time period you're in and what framework. And that's the thing that has to be transformed, because the criminal injustice system that you talk about exists to keep that inequity in place. And that's what's got to be worked on. I guess we had talked about doing an hour unless we had questions coming in and all like that, and we don't seem to have that part of things working. I am not able to access anything coming from the audience. So I guess what we'll do is, if there are any closing remarks you want to make, if you
I
want
will
to
just say
again about
thank
that
you.
grouping that inspired you, that the royalties from the book are going to, you might want to announce that again.
Yeah, sure. I would just say thank you first to Revolution Books for hosting this, and to you, Carl, for taking the time to read the book and for the kind words you said about it, and for taking the time to host this discussion. And just a reminder, I hope you all can get the book from Revolution Books, and all the royalties go to the SE Justice Group, an incredible organization that organizes women with incarcerated loved ones. And if you're a teacher or you know a teacher in high school or college or law school, we also have a fund set up so that you can get free copies of the book for your students. So spread the word to teachers that you know, and for every student that gets a copy of the book, we'll also be sending a free copy to someone in prison. And so we're really trying to get the book out there, and the ideas in the book, that we need a radical transformation of how we think about our criminal system, trying to get to a wider audience. So please help out.
Okay, and again, the book is Usual Cruelty, The Complicity of Lawyers in the Criminal Injustice System. We've been talking today with Alec Karakatsanis about his book. He's the author. And like he says, you can get the book at Revolution Books. You can get it online. Or if you were able to get out and about in the pandemic, you could actually go to Revolution Books during its holiday hours, Tuesday through Saturday, 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. You can do your holiday shopping there, because there are books about the world and books for a new world. Get people some gifts that matter. If you know some people who were marching for justice for George Floyd, talking about an end to murder by police, demanding an end to white supremacy, a book like this might be something that that person would like to read, and on one level would like to, on another level would need to read, to get a deeper understanding of what are we going up against and how do we go up against it. You can find the works of Bob Avakian, the revolutionary leader there, the Constitution for the New Socialist Republic in North America, and books about the world from all over the world, novels, books of poetry, things like that. This is a bookstore that you need to come to know. You need to get on the e-list. You can do that by going to the website of the bookstore, Revolution Books, NYC, and I believe it's .org. I think I got that right. Get on the e-list, find out about future events that we'll be having, because we do this kind of programming all along. Right now during the pandemic, we are mostly doing it virtually. You can check us out from all across the country. Spread the word on the bookstore, spread the word on Alec's book. Pick up the book. Like I said, you can get it at Revolution Books online and in other ways. So I guess that's it for tonight. That's it for this particular program. We thank you for joining in and watching, listening to what was going on. And we hope to connect with you again at some of our programming and events in the future. So that's it. That's the end of our program. Thank you for being with us tonight, Alec. And
Thank you, Carl.